In this video, we're going to look at imitating the look and feel of Tableau legends for times when we need a custom legend for a particular view we've built. So let's create a fairly simple combo chart with multiple axes that demonstrates this. Drag sales onto rows, and right-click drag order date onto columns, so that you can immediately choose the type of date part you want. Switch to a bar chart, set the layout to entire view, and enable text labels. Now what we want to do is introduce a second axis that shows circles along the top of our chart. This will contain the total orders per year. The first step is to ensure our circle chart will sit along the top of the axis. We can do this by using the window max function. This will help us find the highest value on our axis, which in this case is this number over here. However, if we were to use that exact number, our circles would perfectly overlap with the top of this bar, and the labels as they are would clash. So we'd like to have some padding between the bars and the circles. That's why we're going to multiply this value here by 110% to give some extra padding. Now we could save this as a calculation and drag it onto rows, but as we're only looking to use this logic once, we could also just copy the text, double-click inside of rows, and place it here directly. We now have two axes placed next to each other, so let's switch the second to a circle chart and convert it to a dual axis so that both graphs will overlap. Despite sharing the same area on our view, the ranges of each axis are still independent, but it's important that our axes align in order for the circles to be positioned correctly. So we can right-click on one of the axes and select Synchronize Axis. We can then hide the axis from view just to keep things neat. Currently, Tableau is showing us the value of the window max function on the circle labels by default, but we want to know the order count. So we can right-click drag the order ID field onto text to instantly bring up a list of aggregation options to choose from. Notice that Tableau automatically assigns measure names to color when creating a dual axis. This helps us to distinguish between the values in our view now that the charts are overlapping. We're going to need to create our own legend by creating a view that imitates the look and feel of the Tableau-generated legends. To do this, let's start on a new sheet and drag measure values onto text. Right-click drag order ID onto the list of measure values to select the aggregation we want straight away, and then remove any unwanted fields. Switch the chart type to shape and drag the auto-populated measure names onto shape as well. Control or Command click to drag a copy of measure names onto color, and do the same to place a copy on the column shelf. Currently, we have measure values set as the label, so let's move them onto details so that we don't lose them from our view. Then Control or Command click to drag a copy of measure names onto text instead. When first building this view, we could also have just dragged measure values straight onto details from the get-go, but either approach is fine. Now let's simplify the aliases of our measures and hide the headers. Looking at our alignment, you can see that no matter how we set the label alignment, how we set the view layout, or even how we adjust the width of each cell, the issue we face is that the labels themselves don't align to the actual shapes, but rather to the edges of the cell that contains each shape. The way around this in Tableau is to use fake axes, so let's create an axis using max 1.1. The reason I specify a decimal place here is because if I don't, Tableau won't let me use decimal points to adjust my axis range, and we need that precision for better sizing. It's also worth pointing out that if I'd simply used max or sum 0 as the dummy axis instead of 1, the shapes would be perfectly centered in the middle, and the labels would be perfectly aligned to the shapes and not the cell. However, as we're trying to imitate the look and feel of Tableau's legends, which are left aligned, we need to be able to control or limit the amount of space to the left of each shape or symbol. So let's edit our axis and switch to a fixed range. Now you can play around with the ranges that work for you, but I personally find that 0.99 and 2 are a good fit for imitating these two legend items. With our view set to standard, we can now adjust the distance between each legend item until we're happy with the sizing. We can then hide the axes, adjust the legend colors as needed, and adjust the size of the shapes. The final step in making our view appear like an actual legend is to remove all graph and grid lines from the background. So let's right-click to format our view and make sure all borders and grid lines are removed, just to be safe. Finally, let's create a dashboard that brings in our combo chart, as well as our custom legend. Currently, our legends run horizontally, But if we wanted to switch to a vertical orientation, we could simply go to our sheet and place measure values onto rows instead of columns. This way, we can adjust the orientation of our legends just as we could with the default legends generated by Tableau.